dancing around and punching above our weight militarily. That hasn't brought anyone any good. Now, Graham talked about education and free education. That has made a huge difference in my own life. I didn't have support to go to university, and I would never, as a wee 18-year-old, have signed up for what doing medicine now in England would be almost £80,000 worth of debt. I just wouldn't have done it. I have obviously gained. I would hope that most of my patients feel that it was worth that I got the skills and that I got the training to look after them. And what we are finding now is south of the border is that talent is being lost. The way our talent is being lost is through poverty and deprivation. We know the association of deprivation with health. We know the association of poverty and education, life choices, life chances, people ending up in despair, ending up as addicts, ending up in prison. We all spent money for that. Running services, paying more police officers, running prisons, and yet we're wasting that talent. What we could do in a new Scotland is we could be taking that money and we could be spending it on our people, on a good start in life. Because the NHS can't give you health. What gives you health is a good start in life, is fitness, is education, is opportunity. All we do is catch you when you fall. And you're glad that we catch you when you fall. And all of you, whether you're middle class or working class or no class or not working, you know that we're there. And eventually down south, the aim is that that won't be the case. Because this isn't the work of a year. This goes back to Mrs. Thatcher's dream. And unfortunately, this was not, I have a dream. This was, people should pay, people should have insurance, and that's how the NHS should be run. Now, we couldn't do it back then, but there's been a relentless march towards an insurance-based system. And when Labour come in and go, vote for Ed, and we'll change it, they're the ones who laid the foundation. They're the ones who changed the law to allow any qualified provider. They were the first ones to bring private firms into the English NHS. And what we have now is we have a totally uncontrolled external market. And the next threat coming over the hill, which will affect us, is a free trade agreement between Europe and America. That's called TTIP. Now, what that involves is breaking down trade barriers and American companies being allowed to enter any market in a country. Now, the NHS in England is now a market, so they would enter it. A country can already go to Europe and say, well, I want to exempt that. And what's very weird is Westminster has not even asked to exempt English NHS. And I believe that's because they see that as the fourth step. The quickest way to move us, finally, to an insurance-based system is to bring in the people who do it for a business. The head of NHS England, Simon Stevens, used to work for United Health in America, a big healthcare company. The direction of travel is clear. Our direction of travel has been completely the opposite. We have gone back to a unified public NHS. We work together, we cooperate, we collaborate, we share ideas across Scotland. You're not going to find that between Marks and Spencers and Debenhams. You're not going to find that between two hospitals who are competing. And we have that, and we can't protect it with a no vote. We know George Osborne has 25 billion worth of cuts that he's already announced. That'll cut us. We know that Barnett is probably going to disappear, particularly when they give us these pathetic little extra powers that we can collect a little bit more of our income tax. What they'll say is, right, Barnett's gone, that's 4 billion. You put your taxes up if you want more. Because that's what they're going to use those extra powers for. But the lucrative taxes, VAT, corporation tax, the oil money, petrol and alcohol duty, and particularly the Crown Estate money that's coming from marine energy, all straight down the M1. It's just oil all over again. What we need to do is we need to be brave. We need to take our future into our own hands. We need to not sit back and say, oh, well, I don't think we could manage. We'll let the big boys in London, you know, they went to a good school. They could make the decisions. We need to grow up and take responsibilities. We're like 45-year-olds still sitting in our mother's house because we'll get a free dinner and our washing done. I think 307 years of sitting in our mother's house, letting someone else make the decision, is way, way, way past moving out time. We can do it. The figures show that. I don't think it will be easy. I think there's a little bit too much of people imagining that on the 25th of March it's just going to all land on your lawn like manna from heaven. It isn't. We're really going to have to work for it. But Graham talks about being the generation. We are all the generation. We're the generation with the honour to make this decision. What a time to be alive, to make this decision for our children, our grandchildren, their children. But we also have the responsibility to make the best decision we can and then be prepared for 10 years of bloody hard work. But it will be absolutely worth it, because the Scotland we get is a Scotland we control. The Parliament will be full of the people we have voted in, and the decisions that get made will be decisions we agree with. They don't do what we want in Holyrood. 5 years later, we chuck them out in the street. We've never been able to do that. We've never been able to put a party out of power. So I'm asking you, in 5 weeks' time, 5 weeks today, when you go into that booth, if you're still unsure now, get your questions answered, do your homework, go online, get the figures, speak to someone. And then, in your heart of hearts, make the right decision for you. But don't do it out of fear. Do it with what you feel is right for you. If you're a heart and soul Brit, that you believe the Queen, Britain is the stronger thing, then vote no, because that's the right thing for you. But if you're one of these people I meet all the time saying, oh, I'd love Scotland to be independent, but we couldn't, you'll regret that. Be brave, suck it up, take your stubby pencil, mark it on yes, and get ready for a busy 10 years.
Thanks, Philippa. I think that just about covered everything I want. The reasons I'm voting yes, that's for sure. It is a wee bit scary to think it's only 5 weeks away. And like Philippa said, I think it's all about getting information and using your own common sense to decide what's right and what's wrong. I think we've seen in the media, the BBC and our press, that it's unlikely that you're going to get unbiased facts in any of those medias. So the internet, for me, is where I'll get my information, and you can pick and choose where you go, and there's no barriers, and there's nobody telling you have to look at this particular website. You go and find the answers. Challenge what you see in the newspapers, because I want people to make a decision, yes or no, based on evidence. I don't want them just doing it on a whim. This is too important for that. However, our final speaker tonight, I was slightly worried trying to work out how I was going to introduce our next speaker. I don't think I really need to say anything too much. Jim Sillars is a man that I've admired all my lifetime. The one thing about Jim is he says it as it is. He's stuck solidly to his principles all of his life. And today we had the privilege of having him going round Dumbarton the Vale in what was torrential rain, listening to him campaigning on the streets of Dumbarton the Vale. And very good he was too, and I'm very grateful for his time today. But he also was on a particularly special vehicle today, the Margomobile. Whoa. And there's no doubt about it, Jim's late partner was also a very strong person, a person that stuck to her principles all of her life. And frankly, I was very, very proud to be part of that team today with the Margomobile. And again, thank you very much, Jim, for that. But Jim's a great believer, and I noticed today, you know, he showed us just how it's done, about speaking straight to people, saying it as it is. And I think tonight, I think you're going to hear a man who will say it as it is, a man who has stuck to his principles throughout his career and who is voting yes for all the right reasons. And I'm sure Jim will answer all your questions afterwards. But can I invite you to the platform, Jim, and say a few words? Thank you.
An illustration of the age gap. Graham's got one of these technological things. I've got a piece of paper. I would like to start with a quote from Margaret. Out of self-respect comes self-confidence. And out of that comes imagination, innovation, and the whole world opens up with independence. I want you to bear in mind those words, where self-confidence, imagination, and innovation, because that's what I'm going to talk about when we are independent, what we can do. I am a grandpa. I've got 10 grandchildren. And I've written each one of them, when I moved from P7 to the first year in secondary, I've written them a grandpa letter, on the basis that they're more likely to listen to me than their mother and father. And all the evidence I have in our family is that is a fundamental truth. And, you know, I've given them advice, but I've been involved in politics since 1960. I am not a trained economist, but I reckon I'm pretty good at analysing economic circumstances. So good was I that when the Queen asked Alistair Darling, did nobody know the crash was coming, I'm shouting at the television, I did. And I'll tell you why. There was a guy called, he is still alive, very, very alive intellectually, called Professor Rubini in the United States, who was warning what was going to come. And they called him Dr. Doom. And I've got a friend, a Scot, who now works out of Hong Kong, who in the year 2007, in October, sent me a document that he had produced for his clients with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse up there, with Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Fred, with his face on one of the horses. And what Jim told me was that the tsunami was coming, that there was major crises developing in the United States on the subprime system, and it was going to collapse. So I saw it coming. I'm only an old age pensioner. Alistair Darling, it's very interesting. Alistair Darling, you should go on the web and look at his last budget speech. 3% rate of growth and stability in the financial institutions. At the same time he was saying that, I made a speech in Edinburgh to 300 folk, warning them about what to come. Alistair Darling was talking about 3% rate of growth, stability in the banking system, just as it was about to collapse. And I can't understand for a moment why anybody in Scotland would take his advice in the economic future. So I've analysed the United Kingdom economy. It's at the last stage of imperial decline. We have to put this in its historical context. There was an English/British Empire. And like all empires, you know, the Persians fell, Alexander the Great went, the Romans went, Portuguese went, the Spanish went, the French went. Why do we think the English/British Empire shouldn't go the same way? Rise, fall, decline, and final fall. We're in the final stages of decline of that empire. It's very important that we understand the context in which we are debating. The national debt of the United Kingdom is £1.3 trillion. It's heading for £1.5 trillion. And the £25 billion cuts that are coming in the public services next year are only tranche 1, because there'll be tranche 2 and tranche 3 coming later on, as this declining power is unable to pay its way in the world. So I've got to tell my grandchildren, I've sat them down one by one and along top of them. One of my grandsons, we go for a bacon roll and a coffee every Saturday morning. And I've had to tell them that probably grandparents, when I was a youth, had to tell their grandchildren. If we remain in this declining United Kingdom, the best advice I can give you is to get the best skill level you can possibly have, or if you go to university, the highest academic qualifications you can get in order to go to either Canada, Australia or New Zealand. Now, I would like on Hogmanay to be in my own living room in my own house. And I would like all my grandchildren to come and wish their grandpa a Happy New Year. What I don't want is a phone call from New Zealand for a grandchild or a great-grandchild phoning me up to wish me a Happy New Year. Now, I want to talk about two things tonight. One is Fastlane, and the other is about oil in the Clyde. Now, the workers and their families at Fastlane and at Scotstoun and Govan are being told, you vote yes and you will lose your job. They're in exactly the same position now as my great-great-grandfather and others of his generation were, captured by their companies. I come from Ayrshire, where there was steel and coal, and the miners were owned by the company. The workers at Fastlane are owned by the British government, and the workers at Govan and Scotstoun are also owned by the British government through British Aerospace Systems. That's how far we have regressed as a people, a proud working class trade union organised people. How dare the freedom to vote in a democratic election be threatened by the threat, if you vote yes, I'll punish you by taking your job away. And the tragedy is, it isn't necessary. That's why I want to talk about oil and gas. Not in the North Sea or in the Clearfield that people have asked me, and if you want to care about the Clearfield, yes, it's developing and there's potential to the west as well. That's not what I'm going to talk about right away. I'm going to talk about oil and gas in the Clyde. You didn't ken that, and neither did I. I was an MP along with David Lambie in Ayrshire in the 1970s, and we picked up all the rumours about folk doing various seismic studies. But we didn't have freedom of information in those days. So when we asked the government, we got it blank. George Younger, who was a minister at the time, appeared to let the cat out the bag, but it was quickly followed by a statement from his office that had been misinterpreted. So from the 70s and the 80s, there's been a potential oil and gas industry under the waters of the Firth of Clyde. Chick Brodie, the MSP for that area, delved into the National Archives, and he's got files that length which proves all the scientific evidence of the oil and gas being there. But what he discovered, well, we would regard it as remarkable. I don't. He discovered a letter which referred to another letter written by a man called Roger Mansell. You've never heard of him, I've never heard of him, nobody elected him. but he was the guy who ran the Ministry of Defence. And on the 17th of September 1981, bear that year in mind, on that day, he wrote to the Department of Energy forbidding any possibility of the exploitation of the oil and gas under the waters of the Clyde, forbidding specifically any oil rigs being placed there, because they could not sail what was then the Polaris submarine safely up the Clyde past the Ailsa Craig into open waters if there were oil rigs all over the place. So they kept us in total ignorance of the potential. 1981 was the year when Margaret Thatcher began to destroy our industrial base. So onshore were being decimated and offshore were being kept in ignorance of an industry that could transform the west of Scotland. Glasgow should have become the Aberdeen of the West. You know what it means when Trident goes? It means that we can get that oil and gas, and it's a brand new industry of high quality jobs and high quality wages. What are the men at Fastlane and Scotsman and Govan worried about? We're going to be able to build rigs, to build supply vessels. We're going to have onshore and offshore high-level marine engineering. Fastlane or Drussenhammer and places like that will become boom areas, supplying the new oil industry. Is it no better to build rigs than hang on hoping the MOD will give you an order for a warship? What we are getting at Fastlane, Scotsman and Govan is pure blackmail by the British government. Now let me talk a bit more generally about the oil. And the folk at Fastlane, Scotsman and Govan should realise this. There's going to be a huge programme of decommissioning of oil rigs. You know, there's over 570 oil rigs in the North Sea. That's not a puddle out there, it's a major oil field. A number of them become technologically redundant, and they've got to be taken ashore and decommissioned. Over the next 10 years, the value of the decommissioning is £10.3 billion worth of work. If we are independent, and we've got the power in our parliament, because it's our area, it's our lawful area, we can tell the oil companies, hey, you've had a good run for your money. From now on, you are going to ensure that the decommissioning of oil work comes to various parts of Scotland. And that's high-skilled, high-technical, high-paying wages. That's the kind of thing you can do with the power of independence. If we vote no, Shetland will get one, because they're starting to build one up there to decommission. The rest of us will get nothing. Now, the other thing about oil. Now, folks say, oh, it just goes on about oil. I do true a day. We're the only developed nation that ever discovered oil, and our people got poorer. Freedom of information now gives us the document written by Dr. Gavin McCrone, who was the chief economist to the Scottish Government in the early 1970s, as the oil began to be understood. And in that memorandum, he said that if Scotland was an independent country, it would be one of the most prosperous in the world. That was marked secret and kept secret until probably about a year ago. During that time, when they had that memo in their hands at Westminster, they were telling you and me that oil wasn't worth very much, it would run out and all that sort of stuff. So we've been in a prison of lies on oil, and we've been diddled on it from the day and hour the first drop arrived on the mainland. The other thing to understand is that half of it in the North Sea is now out, but that leaves the other half, 40 or 50 years of oil. There's 21 billion barrels of oil to come from the North Sea. What I want you to think about is what we might do with a tiny proportion of the black stuff itself when we can control that if we're independent. We have 40 million tonnes of oil coming from the North Sea every year. The amount of oil we use domestically in Scotland for our petrol and our diesel, for private cars, railway locomotives and the trucking industry is only 10,241 tonnes. That is 0.02% of that 40 million tonnes. Let us assume that we take 0.05% and we slash the price of petrol and diesel and jet fuel. Just think what that would do. That's just with one tiny policy decision over a tiny proportion of that black stuff. That would mean that folk in their own localities have more money to spend locally. It means that the tourist industry, which has a difficulty getting folk above the Glasgow-Edinburgh line because of the fuel costs going up into the Highlands. It would mean an enormous boost to the tourist industry. It would mean that our trucking industry would be one of the most efficient in the whole of Europe. I was in Campbellton on Monday night, and a farmer said one of his biggest problems was the cost of getting his produce to market, because it's a long way from Campbellton, you know, up and down that road. But if he had half the fuel costs that he's got now, he's suddenly in a better position to get access. That's a policy that we can make with one tiny proportion of that stuff. The other thing we have to understand about oil is that those billion barrels of oil in the second half of the North Sea are worth far more to a nation of 5 million people than they are to a nation of 60 million people. I'll give you an example. Let's say I won the lottery last night. I think it's 2 million. I had one winning ticket, and all you folk are in a syndicate, and you've got the other million. Well, my 1 million's a lot more beneficial to me than the million split up between the rest of you. And that's the difference between 5 million people having that oil and having to share it with 55 million other people. What we need to do in order to develop the Clyde, bring jobs to Fastlane when Trident goes, bring proper jobs to Govan and Scotstoun, is set up a Scottish National Oil Corporation owned by us to develop